Welcome dear students to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. K.S. Nagaraja of Deccan College, Pune, teaching the course of Historical Linguistics. In today's module, we look at the development of writing systems in the world. As we know, speech is primary, while writing is secondary. Speech precedes writing by many millennia of development. But once writing started, it stole the limelight. So for historical linguists, writing is very essential, which alone leaves behind some evidence of language. This module studies the role of writing in historical linguistics. The most basic kind of evidence for historical linguistics is written evidence, old inscriptions and manuscripts. When, for example, the Latin alphabet was introduced to England, the Latin letters were used to represent more or less the same sounds in Old English as they did in Latin. Therefore, our knowledge of Latin pronunciation and of the Latin alphabet give us a lot of information about the pronunciation of Old English. When Old English scribes stopped writing Y in such words as MYS, FYLLAN, etc., and began spelling them Miss, Filan, etc., there is evidence that U, the unrounded U, had changed to unrounded E. In Old English writing, scribes used to distinguish between worde, a dative and instrumental singular form, and varda, a genitive plural meaning of words, and between the singular denu, valley, and the plural dena, valleys. At a later stage, the forms verde was used in both instances, and similarly dene stood for both singular and plural. The evidence suggests that all final vowels have fallen together and are being written A. At a still later stage, we find valleys being written as denes, the result apparently of the spread of the more common S ending for plural to words that did not have this ending. Thus, materials of concern in historical linguistics are available through written records called texts. In order to interpret texts adequately, a historical linguist must be equipped to deal with the writing system used to record them, even though he generally uses a standard transliteration. These, however, are often inadequate, occasionally even inaccurate. Accordingly, one of the first tasks of historical linguists is to master the writing systems of the languages with which he is concerned and their standard transliteration. All human orthography is an attempt to set down visually the flow of spoken words. The primacy of the spoken over a written language is so obvious as to be hardly worthy of mention. We all learn to speak our own language well before we learn to write, and there were and are many people of the world who never learned to write or whose languages have no writing systems, but all men or all people speak a properly formed language. The origin of writing is unclear. It may have resulted from attempts at artistic expression like the animal figures found in various caves around the world, or often attempts to depict figures for magical or religious purposes. Such figures may be compared with representations still used today which have no direct relationship with language. Such efforts to symbolize situations rather than speech may be considered the precursors of writing. We speak of writing systems only when symbols have been devised to represent elements of the language. In the history of mankind, only 3 writing systems have been devised which have gone through a long series of development and adaptation for various languages, those of Egypt, Sumer, and China. They may actually be of one origin, but our data on their possible relationship are inadequate. The development of writing system from pictures to alphabets may be detailed as follows. The earliest Egyptian text consists of what are known as hieroglyphs, which are pictorial representations of the object represented by the word they stand for. A representation of a head stands for TP, head. A representation of a hand stands for DRT, hand. Hieroglyphs may therefore be said to represent words for actions or abstractions as well as for objects. We may therefore refer to them as logograms. Some homophones came to be indicated by the same hieroglyph. The word for 10,000 dB, for example, was a homophone of the word for finger and was represented by the symbol for finger. In a further development, some hieroglyphs came to be used for two consonants because one of the consonants of the word was lost. Other words may have always consisted of two consonants. For example, the words for swallow was WR. This also came to be used for WR, large. Further, as a parallel representation of longer words such as WRE, be wary. As a result of losses of further consonants, some hieroglyphs came to stand for words with only one consonant. 24 such symbols came to be used to represent syllables with one consonant. When writing systems are used in everyday activities, writers find it difficult to maintain elegance and clarity of representation. With choice of writing materials, attempts at wide use of writing and rapidity of writing are responsible for many changes in the outward shapes of symbols. Egyptians were no exceptions to this. The earliest cursive system is known as hieratic. It gave rise to another more abbreviated system known as demotic. The symbols of both hieratic and demotic look quite different from the handsome hieroglyphs. The decipherment of the hieroglyphic writing system was made possible by a trilingual text available in the Rosetta Stone, which was accidentally discovered in 1799 by the soldiers of Napoleon while preparing fortifications in Egypt. It contained a text in three writing systems, the Greek as well as Demotic and hieroglyphic. From the copies of the Rosetta Stone, a French scholar, Champollion, in 1824 deciphered the hieroglyphic system. The Demotic system was deciphered in 1848 by a German, Heinrich Bruch. The Rosetta Stone itself was taken to England in 1802 and is preserved now in the British Museum. Further modifications of shape were introduced when the Semitic system was borrowed by the Greeks, probably in the 9th century BC. The essential modification of the Greek was a conversion of the syllabic system and the introduction of syllables for vowels. In naming the symbols, the Semites and the Greeks used the acrophonic principle. The second symbol was called beta by the Greeks after the Semitic name. Note Hebrew Beth means house. The third gamma, Hebrew gimel, camel, and so on. The Greeks contributed mostly the vowel symbols to the alphabet. We have seen how the vowel A came to be. The symbols for A and O developed similarly from consonant symbols in which the initial consonant was lost. They did not, however, gain general currency in classical times or subsequently. The Greeks also introduced symbols for open A and O besides those for epsilon and omicron, close A and O. In Ionic Greek, h was not pronounced. The symbol for it, h, was taken over for eta, open A, comparing with the symbol capital E for close A. Apparently, on this pattern, an open O for omega was introduced besides close O. The Greeks also introduced 4 additional characters for the Semitic alphabet, those for upsilon, p, chi, and psi. The sources of those are unknown to us today. Pedersen suggests a relationship for upsilon and chi with symbols in the syllabary of Cyprus. Further, it may be that the use of the vowel syllables in Cyprus may have led to the introduction of vowel letters in the alphabet. The Romans, who borrowed the Greek writing system through the Etruscan, introduced further modifications in the system. Runic symbols were used only for relatively short inscriptions, many of them at burials. The symbols we know from Latin were adapted to simplify carving on wooden tablets because the runes were read in any position. The runic inscriptions are of interest to linguists as they provide our earliest Germanic texts. Vagam inscriptions used for early Irish are made of notching or lining the corners of posts. Series of 1 to 5 dots or 1 to 5 lines extending to the right, to the left, or in both directions of an edge provide 20 symbols, 5 for vowels and 15 for consonants. Though subject to weathering, the Vagam inscriptions, when legible, are valuable in giving us our earliest Irish and Welsh texts. Based directly on Greek were the 2 Slavic systems, the Cyrillic and Glagolitic, both of the 9th century. The writing systems may be classified into 3 groups. 1. Logographic. Symbols represent words, for example, early Egyptian. 2. Syllabic. Symbols represent syllables, for example, Devanagari. 3. Alphabetic. Symbols represent sounds, for example, Greek. Alphabetic writing systems may be further classified into a morphophonemic writing system and an autonomous phonemic writing system depending on the level of phonological representation. The cuneiform or wedge-shaped script was developed by Sumerians in the 4th millennium BC. It was taken over by Akkadian and from them by various neighbors, by the Hittites and other groups in Asia Minor, by Elamites and by various less well-known groups. It passed out of use in the 4th century AD. The earliest Sumerian texts indicate that the cuneiform system developed from pictures. As these symbols were inscribed with a stylus on clay tablets, they came to be stylized in wedge-shaped forms. When the picture becomes rigidly conventionalized, we call it a character. It is a uniform mark or set of marks which people produce under certain conditions and to which they respond in a certain way. Complex symbols also were developed and characters could be used merely for their phonetic value. When cuneiform symbols were taken over by Akkadians, another complexity was introduced. Symbols could be read either by the Sumerian or their Akkadian values. When taken over by the Hittites, the cuneiform system could be read with Sumerian, Akkadian and or Hittite values, compounding the complexity further. A long inscription at Behistun, Iran, was the avenue for deciphering cuneiform. This inscription of the Persian king Darius 521 to 488 BC was copied in part by travelers in the 18th century by Hesse Rawlinson and recently by G.G. Cameroon. Early scholars noted that the inscriptions from Old Persian area were composed in three languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian. By assuming that the Behistun inscription was to be attributed to the Persian kings, they substituted their names, compared reading of non-proper names with Avestan and Sanskrit words, and eventually mastered the Old Persian texts and through them the cuneiform system of writing. The Old Persian texts furnished a relatively ready access to decipherment of cuneiform. Because of Old Persian, only 36 syllabic characters with 5 additional signs had been maintained. Mastery of them led to the reading of Akkadian, the third language of the Behistun inscriptions. For the proper names provided ready comparison. Other Akkadian texts were then read. Among them were lists and grammars indicating the value of syllables or value of symbols in Akkadian. Still other texts were avenues to Sumerian. The reading of cuneiform in this way gave access to the history of the Middle East from the 4th millennium BC. The reading of cuneiform texts is aided by the presence of determinatives, symbols used with nouns to indicate morphological and semantic classes such as plurals, gods, men, river, wooden articles, and so on. Determinatives are markers which themselves have no phonetic value, somewhat like capital letters for proper nouns and adjectives in English or for nouns in German. The symbols used for them may also be read as word symbols. The Chinese writing system has remained logographic. In Japan, it has been modified to a syllabic system which is generally used in conjunction with logographs. Chinese characters also developed from pictures. As the characters were inscribed on wood, the lines of characters was straightened and the characters became stylized. In Japan, means were devised to indicate inflectional syllables and particles. Certain characters were selected to indicate syllabic values, as for the particle ka. 48 characters make up the Japanese kana syllabary. Of this, there are 2 forms, the hiragana used normally and the katakana, which compares in use to our italics. Hiragana symbols developed from rapidly written forms of characters. The katakana symbols developed from abbreviated forms. The Mohenjo-daro, that is Sindh, and Harappa, that is Punjab script, found on hundreds of seals, many of which have little characteristic designs, figures of bulls and other animals mostly, and some of human beings, present several stages: pictorial, hieroglyphic, and syllabic. The Sindh-Punjab script has affinities outside India with the Elamite script and with those of Crete and Cyprus. The Mohenjo-daro and Harappa script found on hundreds of seals are very important from the Indian point of view. And it looks very probable that there is a connection between this very ancient script of India and that prevalent in the Eastern Mediterranean world before the Phoenician script in the form of Greek alphabet came and put it out of use. In the syllabic non-pictorial form of Sindh-Punjab script, it seems almost certain that the principle obtaining in the Brahmi alphabet and its descendants, the Gupta, the Devanagari, the Bengali, the Grantha, etc., of tagging on vowel symbols to consonant letters are obtained. And the shapes of many of the symbols in the Sindh-Punjab script appear to be like the earlier forms of Maurya Brahmi of the 4th to 3rd century BC, the resemblances being many and striking. So whatever might have been the origin of the Sindh-Punjab script, it is more likely that it was the source of the national alphabet of India, that is the Brahmi, the mother of all later forms of Indian scripts. Some scholars are of the opinion that the Brahmi is a derivation from a script specimen of which are said to be those inscriptions engraved in the caverns of the hills in Madurai, Ramanathapuram and Tirunelveli districts of the Madras state. This older Tamilian script, which we may call the Tamil Nadu cave script, is simple in form and has one or two additional features not found in the Brahmi of the Ashokan edicts. This might be a link then between the Sindh-Punjab script on the one hand and the Brahmi script on the other. When any graphic material is analyzed, the type of writing system must be determined and its degree of correspondence with the contemporary language ascertained. Obsolete spellings are helpful for historical study, for example, psychology, knee, often in English, though possibly difficult to interpret. The most frequent imperfection in the writing system is failure to indicate some of the phonemes in a language. Suprasegmentals such as pitch, stress and juncture are rarely indicated. Another feature which is poorly indicated is quantity. When writing systems provide insufficient information, we attempt to supplement it in various ways, most commonly by the analysis of verse, which utilizes end rhyming, alliteration, prasa, etc. Chaucer rhymed clean and mean, but not clean and green. This indicates that vowel sequences aya and aa were different in his time and could therefore not be used in rhyming. As often source of information is the pun, the play on words. In Henry IV, Part 1, we find, well, if Percy be alive, I will pierce him. This play on Percy, Pierce, was possible because Shakespeare and his audience were accustomed to hearing them pronounced alike. In non-literate society, we may have to rely on oral poetry, since tribes that do not have written records may possess sacred chants of great antiquity that still preserve archaic features of the language. Oral literature of great value may eventually find a written form many generations after its creation, when a writing system comes into use in the speech community and thus passes into the corpus of permanently recorded literary texts upon which the linguist may work. Scribal errors and also misspellings help us determine the actual pronunciation when conventional spellings do not reflect the spoken language. And in recent times, attempts are also made to interpret writing systems by the use of structural evidence. Graphemic systems may be analyzed for the internal relationship of their elements and for the relationship with the phonemic system of the linguistic material they represent. It may be said, finally, that interpretation of writing systems is best done by skilled use of all approaches. The most obvious reason for choosing a particular writing material is, without doubt, its geographical availability. There were also effects of cultural determinism. Leather was never used further east than Iran. Buddhists and Hindus alike would have viewed with horror the idea of writing their sacred texts on the skin of slaughtered animals. Palm leaves were, until the beginning of the 20th century, the most commonly used writing material in South and Southeast Asia. To make a palm leaf fit for writing, each leaf is split from the central rib, cut to size, boiled, dried, and then rubbed smooth with a stone or a cowrie's shell. A pile of palm leaves is secured between two wooden boards fastened together by a cord running through holes in each leaf. The Chinese pilgrim Quan Zhang, who visited India in the 7th century BC, described a large palm leaf forest in Konkanapura surrounding a Buddhist stupa. The first documentary evidence of Indo-Aryan languages in the Indian subcontinent comes not from Old Indo-Aryan but from Middle Indic, the inscriptions of the ruler Ashoka in the 3rd century BC. The first direct attestation of Sanskrit comes from around the beginning of the present era. The first extensive inscription is that of the ruler Rudradaman of 150 AD at Girnar in western India. The first extant manuscript found in Central Asia date from about the same period. To summarize then, the above description briefly provides development of writing from the very beginning. The significance of understanding written text properly has been emphasized, as without that evidence, language change cannot be properly understood nor interpretable. So this is very important area. Students should study carefully from the references given and also from the internet, and also they can interestingly work out some exercises because what type of writing system the newspapers employ, whether they are similar or different, that would be interesting. So this just leads the students for better understanding of writing system, and its role in historical interpretation is most important for the historical linguists. Thank you.